Welcome to Imagine Wealth Without Risk, the podcast that guides you to fulfilling your dreams through guaranteed, secure investing. Here's your host, Ted Thomas.
Hi, everyone. This is Ted Thomas, and welcome to Wealth Without Risk. And I'm glad you're here, and you're going to learn a lot today. This is going to be pretty exciting. We're very fortunate to have an author with us today, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate authors because a lot of people have a lot of fancy degrees from schools. And as a matter of fact, our guest even has a fancy degree like a Ph.D., and I'm always impressed with that. But here's what really impresses me is she wrote a book, and this is, just listen to this title, The Pursuit of Time and Money. Now, we never heard of that, did we? Wow. Think about that. So she's written a book about it, and I'm very fortunate to have her on our call today, and I'm really excited to have you here, Sharon. Can you hear me okay this morning?
Absolutely, and thank you so much for your kind words about the book.
Oh, listen, the book is, that's something else. Now, can they get that in a bookstore? Do they order that on Amazon? Where do they get a book like that?
They can get it on Amazon. They can get it at a bookstore. They can get it on my website at thetimemoneybook.com. But I would extend an offer for any of your listeners, Ted, to if they go to thetimemoneybook.com/free, we would be more than happy to send out a copy to anyone who's.
Oh, aren't you nice? What a nice way to start our call. Folks, you're listening to Sharon Spano. She's right here in Orlando, Florida, and she is really a PhD, and her recognized skills you're going to hear in the next few minutes. This is going to be very exciting. So I'm glad to have you on board. And Sharon, I told you briefly about my clients, and boy, if there's anyone that can help them, it'll be you. I provide a lot of information about the business and how to make money with government certificates, which is really a super simple business. And the people that are attracted, which I think you'll like to know about, are people that they've already had success at something. So they're not just average people. Some of them are retired after 20 or 30 years working as a professional with a company. But most of them are struggling a little bit with being an entrepreneur. And I'm hoping you can give us a little guidance today. So let me just tell you a little bit about them, and then I'll let you flow where you feel comfortable with, because I know that you can help these people a lot. So to tell you about them, they've done well. I know they've done well because they spent a lot of money with me. So if they spend a lot of money for these courses, they've done well because they've already have a home to live in, a couple of cars. A lot of the kids are already in college level. Things have changed a lot. And now people are becoming more entrepreneurial, kind of doing things on their own. And who is there to guide us? We don't have a lot of guidance in this area. Everybody says, well, be an entrepreneur. That's nice for that kid on the internet. He's about 24 and he's got a black t-shirt on. The rest of us are a little chubby and got some gray hair. And we need a little guidance. Can you help us along with some of that?
I think it's an interesting point that you bring up, Ted, particularly when you say some of your clients are retirees, because what we know, and I'll just address this kind of quickly from a developmental perspective, because my PhD is in human and organizational systems. I'm not an academic. I'm someone who's been out in the field for over 30 years, but I have my own consulting practice, and I work a lot with high-level entrepreneurs and even small business owners because I love to help them scale their businesses. But my work is grounded in human development. So for your listeners, I would say what we see often in the corporate environment is people who have been in corporate all their lives and they're used to a certain kind of structure and they're used to having monetary resources, whether it be for collateral materials for marketing or whatever. And then if you step into an entrepreneurial role, particularly later in life as maybe a second career, that challenge is often different because and it has nothing to do with work ethic or talent or skills or any of those things, because I'm sure most of your clients are highly skilled. It has to do with, no surprise, mindset. And I remember years ago talking with someone, Harris Rosen, who's a great entrepreneur and hotelier here in Central Florida, and literally asking him the question if he thought people could become entrepreneurs or if you're born an entrepreneur. And his perspective was, you're born an entrepreneur. But I would say in today's market, if we look at it developmentally, what we know is there are 12 stages of human development. 68% roughly so of the United States workforce are in what we call an expert or achiever stage of development. One is not better than the other. They're just different perspectives. So we often see the entrepreneurs at the achiever perspective where they're just going to get out and, as my husband would say, hunt and make things happen and close those deals or do whatever they have to do.
Right.
where someone perhaps at an expert, and again, this isn't this linear, this simple by any stretch of the imagination, but the expert level is often the person who has a very specific skill set, maybe an engineer, a financial advisor, or an attorney, and it might be more difficult to step into an entrepreneurial perspective. In answer to your question, I believe it can be done, but there needs to be a willingness on the part of the individual to do what I will call the work to learn what it means to think, act, and behave like an entrepreneur. And one of the areas I think of greater challenge, particularly if you're in your later stages of life by that age, is the whole issue of technology. And so, yeah, it's not as easy for those of us that are baby boomers, but that, again, there's an opportunity there, excuse me, to outsource those kinds of things as you and I do for much of it, so that you can focus on the aspects of being an entrepreneur that you're already really good at. Does that shed some light in some way?
Yeah, we're at least telling them that they're A-okay, because some of them don't think they're A-okay. They have an engineering degree, like you say. They've had success at something. Before I get to see people, and I have a few 30-year-olds. There's a few, a darn few, but most of them are 45 to 105, and I say that in a joking manner. But nowadays people work at 80 and 90 years old, and saying you're going to be an entrepreneur sounds pretty easy. You can say it, but doing it means you're probably going to do a lot of different things. And a lot of them have pretty much scarcity thinking. In other words, they're thinking, in my opinion, payday to payday. They're not thinking about, could they really develop something big like a whole new business or a whole new lifestyle and things like that. So maybe you could address some of those things.
If you look at what I've written about in the book, and again, that comes from a developmental perspective of helping people understand how the different stages of development think about time and money. And we also, we look at the spectrum of scarcity to abundance. What's interesting about some of the people that you might be dealing with, and I'll make an assumption here, is that sometimes people, it's fairly obvious if we're in total scarcity at the far end of the spectrum. Those people often aren't even thinking about being an entrepreneur. And then the other end of the spectrum of abundance is also fairly obvious. That's someone like you who would jump in with both feet, a risk taker, do the due diligence, but then just make things happen. What I saw in my initial research and what I wrote about in the book was that kind of zone in between where it's moderate scarcity and moderate abundance, and they're very closely aligned, almost so nuanced that it's difficult to tell one from the other. Because moderate scarcity, it often looks like just being responsible. So the example that I always give is maybe the gentleman who spent his entire career saving for retirement and getting his kids off to college to the point where he literally doesn't enjoy life, afraid to take vacation. And certainly if he stepped into an entrepreneurial endeavor later in life, would be so afraid of taking those risks and jumping in with both feet that it might be challenging for him or her to do. So to me, part of the work to be done is to look at those beliefs. I'm doing a lot of work now with my clients on something called systemic mapping, where we literally can take the subconscious dynamics of the individual and bring them to a visualized map where they can begin to see them in a concrete way and then know where there's changes to be made. That's one way. I would advise any of your listeners to consider coaching, have clear values and a clear strategy for what they want to do, and then do what they can to quiet, because there's a lot of things that can be done to quiet those limiting beliefs such that they take the action steps required to get them to the level of success and highest potential possible.
Okay, now I'm going to pull you back if I can, and if I get you off a track, we'll be very patient and stay with you. I have these clients that are eager to learn. I don't have any of them that are not eager to learn. Now, they're not 18 years old, so they can't go 100 miles an hour, but they can certainly do a nice solid 50 miles an hour and learn how to do stuff. So it's not like they're challenged intellectually. They're not challenged there. Okay, but because they're challenged, what I call, now I don't know if my interpretation is right, so we're going to be more sophisticated than mine, but I have a challenge with this scarcity thinking. Now, let me give you just an example of talking with clients. Now, this weekend I taught a seminar, okay? And everybody in the room was 65 plus. Now, I'm a senior to all these people, but they're not active like I am. They're okay in life and they're semi-retired or whatever. But their scarcity thinking causes them, and I'll tell you why here in a second, causes them to resist what would be good for them. For example, I'm in a business where I show people about these government certificates. And when I say to them, there'll be 1 million of them available in the state of Florida, and the people say, 1 million of them. And they heard me say that, but they didn't get it because they've always thought about, they just got to get to the next payday, to the next vacation, their mind doesn't expand. Now, 10 minutes later, then I show them, all right, we talked about 1 million in Florida, but here we are in Tampa today, and this is Hillsborough County, and there's 40,000 available. And they go into shock now when I say 40. Now, a minute ago it was 1 million. Now I'm just showing them a newspaper ad with all 40,000. I pick up a newspaper with 75 pages, showing them page after page. Now it brings it from $1 million to suddenly it's right there in front of them. But there's scarcity thinking. They just sit there and say, it can't be. It's too good to be true. I mean, they can't adapt. So how do these people, if you're giving them a great service, how do they get from scarcity thinking to just entrepreneurial thinking? Is that possible?
And it may be that some of these, or certainly a percentage of them, are not suited to the level of work that you're offering them for the reasons you've stated. They're used to Social Security or a paycheck or whatever, and maybe there's a level of cynicism that says, yeah, this is too good to be true. But I know you have a successful business and you're helping people generate income through this whole process of tax certification. So there is there is a percentage of them that's getting it. For those that aren't, though, and if they have some inkling or ability to lean into what's possible there, I would encourage them to think about what is it within them that causes them to be skeptical, or is there a piece of them that is afraid they just can't learn the process because of the how-to, but it's the mental block, the scarcity, as you're describing it. And I don't know if that's so much scarcity thinking as it might just be a case of, as you well know, people in this season of life, as you've described it, maybe 65 and over, are not always willing to learn new tricks or step into greater opportunity because they've already had their career and it sounds like, oh, this is going to be just too much for me. But if you can call out the ones that are willing to take the risk, then there's a way to help them think about what does the process look like beyond the skills that you're offering, but also the process of expanding my mind into knowing that, yes, I can really do this. As I said, if they have the clarity of vision, what is the value for them? What do they want differently in their lives? What are they trying to do? Do they want more travel? Are they trying to leave more for their...
No, they want more security. No, I can tell you right now.
They want more security.
Big S security. That's what they want. You have this great book, which I love the title to so much, and I'm wondering, is there specific chapters that a client like mine should be thinking about, go right to that chapter and start reading that? Because they definitely want to do this because they want more security in their life. A lot of people have actually taken early retirement, and we're meeting those people now. And unfortunately, all the costs have gone up, and now they have to come back in and start making a few extra bucks. Now, it's not like they're destitute or anything. Don't misinterpret. But a lot of them say, gee, I'd like to have a new car and whatever.
By today's standards, that's still relatively young, and you can still do a lot in terms of travel and enjoying your life. I'm sure many of them have children or grandchildren. What I would say is, to answer your question about the book, a big piece of this goes back, like I said a moment ago, our earliest mentors, good, bad, or indifferent, are our parents. And so we learn our belief systems around time and money, and they are both very closely linked. If we're scarcity in one, we're likely to be in scarcity with the other. And there's a big piece of the book in the early stages where I ask people to reflect on the ancestry. And for instance, what is it that you believe about time and money, and where did that belief come from? Because that starts to open up awareness. And I always say with the first moment of awareness comes opportunity for change. So yes, looking at the ancestry. Then the book is really about radical abundance and how to step into radical abundance. So there's a big piece in there about what do I mean by radical abundance? And that has to do with really exploring and stepping into higher levels of how you experience time and money, no matter your circumstances, and without any fear-based decisions, which in my opinion are not really decisions at all because they're often made on very little information. But then there's also a piece in there about stewardship. So if some of them are in scarcity, as you've alluded to, they may think they're being responsible when actually they're not being good stewards of the resources that they have. And so there's an opportunity to maybe make that investment with you. Of course, do the due diligence ahead of time to see if it makes sense, but then think about how might I invest in at least one initial program to see if there's something here worth my time and energy that might help me create greater wealth. I love your title, Wealth Without Risk, by the way.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
To
We're
think
both
about it in those
gravitating to
contexts.
good titles, aren't we? That's great. I like, and I didn't explain it well enough to you because I actually operate in a business of abundance. And when I try to explain to people that it's too much, I think I better go read your book because I don't do a good enough job of saying, look, there's all this abundance here and you're going to find it unbelievable. But I won't get bogged down on that. But the point is I'm in abundance and I'm trying to relate to them to get into abundance with me. And their reaction is, oh, it's just too good to be true. I didn't create these programs. These are all government programs that have been around for a couple of hundred years. But okay, so I love this because, all right, so there is something definitely, there's reason enough to get the book right there just to read about this stewardship. Now, that's another challenge, which I never even thought to tell you about. A lot of people don't know how to manage what they're doing. So is there even some of the chapters in here about the management of all this?
I'm not looking at time and money so much from the management perspective, Ted, because there's a lot of books out there on that. And while I do think it's important, I believe that you could have all the time, money management systems in the world, but if your belief system and your attitude is one of scarcity, you're going to sabotage.
Oh, it's much more. Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, there's a million books in the bookstore on how to do that, but there's not a million on the psychology of getting your head on straight, right? That's what we're doing here. Okay, that's very good. I know from a little background in talking to you, you talked about leadership or behavioral DNAs and things like that. And I think you started to allude to that when you talked about the parents and so on. Can you elaborate on that for us?
I do. On the systemic mapping that I was talking to you about, those are retreats, and I look at them in 3 different ways. We have what we call behavioral DNA retreats, and that's where we're literally looking at the participants' experience of time and money, and we do go into some of the ancestry and where in your family system dynamics are there blockages that we might perhaps unleash. Often they're at a subconscious level, as I said, and then we're bringing them to a conscious level where they can begin to make those changes. Then the leadership DNA is more for business individuals who have companies and helping them understand their own leadership DNA, because that is comprised of not only their stage of development, but their personality structure. We also look at lines of development because all of those things make up the DNA, but we're again looking at them through the lens of the systemic mapping and those dynamics that might be in their individual system and how they're showing up as a leader. Because if they're showing up as a leader who comes from scarcity, their business is going to be impacted in one way versus a leader who has a DNA that is flourishing and from abundance. And every leader has some level of subconscious blockage and belief system that may be causing them to stay awake at night. So we flush all of that out in a very specific experiential process, and there's systems linked, or I should say principles linked to the systems work that I teach as well. And then the third level is organizational DNA, where we look at the systems within the business or the company. But all of those I find have moved my clients very quickly to another level of understanding about how they operate and where there might be room for change. And sometimes they need help along the way with initiating and implementing those changes. And then that's where with a very few, I don't do many, but with a very few, I'll do something called integral coaching that really helps them move from the current way they're being in their business and in their life to the new way that they want to be. And by that, we're not throwing out all the skills and talents and wonderful aspects of the individual, but we're actually building upon so that in their new way of being, they can actually step there into another way of looking at their businesses, their life, and creating more abundance and actual prosperity as they do.
Well, I watch people in their life and they're so successful at one thing. And when you ask them to transition to something new, it's not that they don't want to. They won't say they don't want to, but realistically, that's a big challenge to change from doing something where it was all structured within a framework and you had to follow the rules of that company. Not exactly like being in the Army. Big business has a lot of structure to it. Not that's bad in any way, but now you take that person that was very successful at that to the point where they elevated to the highest they could in that company. And now we ask them to have to think this out themselves. And when they do that, now comes the challenge. Now they're
that's exactly right.
Yeah.
I know what you're talking about, because again, sometimes we have evidence of success due to our history. And so I find those are almost harder individuals to work with than the guy who comes to me who's known a lot of failure, because if he's known a lot of failure, he's learned along the way, at least by the time he gets to me. Where if I have evidence to be successful, it's harder for me to realize that there's another way I might be in the world in order to be even more successful. So an example I can give you is my husband is a land developer, and he also owns a real estate brokerage firm. And I remember he brought in a guy one time who was really talented in sales and marketing. He had a whole background for a large company in sales and marketing. And so because he knew so many people and he was so well versed in sales and marketing, my husband assumed he would be good in real estate. But the reality was he was not able to structure or discipline himself to do the daily work. And more importantly, he didn't want to invest one nickel in his own marketing efforts. And people in real estate have to do some as well as the brokerage firm and the larger company as well. And he literally would say, because he was used to having a marketing budget, a car, they got leads naturally. He didn't have to go out and look for them. He really was a sales guy that just fulfilled the calls. And there's nothing wrong with that. But it was a huge transition for him to really learn how to structure his day.
And if he had invested money while he was doing it, and now he had money at risk, he didn't like that at all, because as soon as they have some skin in the game, and they've never had skin in the game, there's a lot of behavioral things that take place that aren't so pleasant sometimes, because people become scared if they're going to lose some money or lose some asset that they might have worked a number of years to get, and so on. So I see those people. The day they step forward and take that risk, I love the example. You said your husband was a land developer. Well, a land developer doesn't see the land. He sees what's getting finished. He sees the end result. Whereas the average guy said, oh, my God, I got to get a bulldozer and clean all those, or I've got to put a road in or something like that. They're not thinking the same way. But the land developer can think about the end result. And that's the challenge I have with these people, to getting them to think about the end results. Do we have any guidance we can pass on there so people can make? I think the transition can be made to a lot of things, like whether it's weight loss or whatever, of thinking what the end result is a lot. It helps. That's my simple way to do it. I haven't studied this or anything like that. I just say, I just got to keep thinking of the end result and I'll be okay. But a lot of people are so talented. Now, I mean that sincerely, because I see people that have done very well at another business. Now, I think very well is you brought your whole gang of kids up. You got a house or two. You got all the physical things you want, like cars and furniture and whatever. And now you're sitting there saying, what do I do next? What I do next is terrifying for a lot of people. It's really terrifying. They can sit. That's it.
Yeah, it is terrifying. But I think if you can maybe create space for them to dream and visualize, as I alluded to, I spoke of it more from a corporate mindset of vision and values and strategy. But even for someone who's, quote, semi-retired, stepping into an opportunity such as you're offering, if you can create space for them to really dream about something that they want during this next season of life, and then the baby steps or action steps of what would it take to begin to move in that direction. I'm reading a book right now that some of your listeners might enjoy called The Obstacle is the Way, by Ryan Holiday. And one of the things he says in there, Ted, that I loved was, you don't have to do the big thing. We tend to sometimes, like if you're writing a book, for example, if I had thought of the big thing, I probably wouldn't have been able to write. But what I did was I thought of, this week, I've got to come up with the outline. This week, I'm going to think of a title. This week, I'm going to write one chapter within that outline. And the next thing, you have a book. And I think if people could think of it that way, what are some of the courses I might need? And then what is the initial investment? And then what is it that I'm trying to create on the other side? And take it in bite-sized pieces. It might be more palatable. And then they can figure out if this is something for them or not, because everybody has different interests and things that they enjoy doing. It might not obviously be for everyone if it's so technical or something that doesn't really light them up. But to me, if you have Stephen Covey years ago in the 80s used to say, it's easy to say no if you have a bigger yes. So what do they need to do to find out and figure out what is the bigger yes? And what is the purpose behind what it is that they want to do in this season of life?
to purpose. I want to go back to this systemic mapping. And anytime someone says mapping to me, I'm an old world pilot. My first career was an airline pilot. So charts and maps and getting A to B was good. But before we do that, could you take a minute and just tell about some of the chapters in the book? Because I want to make sure that people understand that, first of all, I'll say the name of the book again, if you don't mind. It's The Pursuit of Time and Money. And folks, that's what we're all doing here. So I see this as a guide, but tell us a little bit about the chapters, and then I'd like to go and discover more about systemic mapping. That amazes me.
The first part of the book, I'm really setting the premise for people to see what the relationship between time and money, because they're the two of the most important resources that we have, if you really think about it. And by that, each and every day, nearly every decision we make is, do I have enough time? Do I have enough money to do this? Whether it be in business or in life. So the first part is all about that, setting the premise of the importance of time and money. And then we go into, as I said earlier, how did the different stages of development, and that sounds like a very heady conversation, but anyone who has children or been around children understands that there's stages of development. So there's 12, as I said. The first 4 are like baby to adolescence, and then we move on from there. And again, one is not better than the other, but what I'm trying to get the reader to see is that each stage looks at time and money differently, and everybody can relate. It's written in very user-friendly terms, because think of a teenager, for instance, who is working after school and they have a vision of they're saving for a car, and then one of their friends comes along and says, hey, let's go to the beach today, and the next thing you know, he's blown $100 on a bunch of stuff, because at that stage of life, we're fairly egocentric and spontaneous, and they literally don't have the capacity to see beyond the immediate. And so sometimes people get stuck in adulthood like that. And again, it's not right or wrong, but if you understand that, then you can start to strategize differently and make different decisions. Then I go into what is radical abundance, as I said a moment ago, and stewardship. And then ultimately how you might move into some of these different levels of thinking. And again, each chapter has a reflective piece in it. I recommend some journaling, and basically I've recommended that they go through the whole book first. And then we actually, on my website, sharonspano.com, we have the questions formulated in a PDF so they can go back and do them separately.
Really? Wow. Oh, could take their own self-testing, huh?
The reading path. So does that help a little bit?
Nice. Oh, no, that helps a lot. And I love this term, radical abundance. When I say abundance, everybody looks at me. So I'm not going to say radical, but tell us what your definition of that is, radical, because that's really, now we get, everybody wants that, but the reaction I get back is, oh, it looks like it's too big for me. No, there's enough for everybody. That's the point. But anyway,
well,
tell
I
me
can't
what
remember
your
the exact definition as I wrote it in the book, but what the premise behind it, Ted, is that, again, you have an abundant perspective going down to Costa Rica. And in my mind, as I drove through some of these poverty-stricken villages, thinking, oh my gosh, these poor people, and how are they surviving? And by the 4th day of being down there, I very quickly saw, no, these are people who have very abundant lives. They have families and children and picnics on Sunday on the beach, and really having lovely, abundant lives because they were content. There's a level of contentment, radical abundance. And so it's not solely dependent on bank accounts and everything that I have. And it's also, there's a level of detachment with radical abundance. By that, we do the work and we create what we create, but we also understand that there's a flow of money, as my husband likes to talk about, and that sometimes in businesses you have good times and sometimes you have bad times. But an entrepreneur only sees that as an opportunity. They don't see it as a failure. They see it as an opportunity to learn and then build from there. So it is this positive mindset that there is always enough and that I can always create more whenever I need to.
I like that. That's really good. Now, did we cover it, or would you like to give us a little more in-depth about the systemic mapping and so on? Because you teach that. You teach this as a class. You have a weekend class, or what do you do?
Yes, we do this as retreats. They're 2-day retreats. We went in Chicago for leaders October 9th and 10th, and all that information is on my website, sharonspano.com/workshops, and it goes into greater depth of the outcomes of these types of events. I'd like to do some in the future. Next year, we're looking at doing them for couples because we know that money is often an issue with couples and one of the great stressors. So we're going to look at some of the systemic issues and map those out for couples to help them understand their time money issues maybe a little bit better and how they've been perhaps impacted by ancestry. And one example that I can give you, Ted, is someone that I worked with who had a history of coming from 3 generations of entrepreneurs. And at the time I met her, she had a very successful business. She was getting ready to scale to another level. But literally every time she thought about it, she would freeze up and get paralyzed with fear and just couldn't make the necessary decisions to move forward in the best possible way. And when we looked at the work through this process of systemic mapping, what we discovered was she had, yes, 3 generations of successful entrepreneurs behind her, but every time one of them went to scale, they lost the business for one reason or another. So there was literally a vibration, an energetic dynamic, if you will, throughout the family history that was blocking her ability to move forward. And in this work, we often find that we can't explain the how or the why in such a concrete way, but something happens within the client as they're going through the process where they, again, are able to visualize and see their own system dynamics, whether it be personal or professionally different. And then from there, they're transformed and able to make different choices and changes. So I like to say that systemic mapping is a process that is really your change agent, either at a personal or professional level. And it's just the most rewarding work I've ever done, so much so that I'm pivoting a lot of my work in this sole direction because of the impact it's having on my clients.
So it's funny that you say that, because I was thinking about your book as what you've done is you wrote a book about you're the change master and you're trying to get them to make the change. I thought about that about your book when you were talking earlier. So it's really true. That's a heck of a book that can get people to do that. I love what we're talking about because nobody else talks about it. They all say, oh, you just read the book and you become an entrepreneur. It's a bit more of a challenge than that, at least for my clients. It might not be for 26 or 28-year-olds because they're looking at the world today and everything's changing so quick. Just get on the bus and you'll be part of the change. But the clients that I have basically have been in place for 20, 30, sometimes 40 years, and now they're trying to make this change and be entrepreneurial. And they might not get to take it easy at 5 o'clock at night. They might have to take a few phone calls and do a little bit of work. And so sometimes that bothers them a little bit. Great.
Well,
where should we take this from here? Where would you like to take an audience like mine? What recommendations would you have, and what guidance might you pass on?
Before I offer some of that, I want to go back to what you just said a minute ago, Ted, because I think it's so important in that you're absolutely right about it being easier for the younger generation. And here's why, because they literally can slap up a website on their own and say, I'm in business in a heartbeat.
Right.
And they can try it, and if it doesn't work out, they can take that one down and put up another one. And so that's why we're seeing all these big companies surface, because a group come together, they have a great idea, they support one another. One guy's the CEO because it was his idea. They find some investors and boom, they're in business. Most of the guys that I find are successful will tell me, oh, I've had 3 or 4 of these before I landed here. And they can often do it, at least as a startup, with very little money, where the baby boomers, as you mentioned, have been in corporate environments or other environments where maybe they stayed for most of their career or they had a paycheck or whatever. So and they're not able to just put something up very quickly. The millennial and the Gen X generations do some amazing things that I'm very excited about. But what I would say for the baby boomers that you might be servicing is that is the beauty of what you're offering them, as I understand it, is that you're offering a framework, a knowledge, a pathway, an expertise that says, I've done the hard work for you. Just let me show you the path for you to start a new career and make some money here. And you can do as much or as little of it as you want, but you've got to engage and be disciplined enough to at least take part in what I'm offering, or you're not going to have any results. Does that help, that distinction, a little bit in terms of?
Yeah, just the fact that they tuned into the broadcast, they're listening to this, it gets the process started. I'll give you a funny example that was a profitable one that that just happened in my office about 2 months ago. I have young people in the office, and this young man, he's very quiet. He sits here, and I joke with him. He plays with his computer all day. And so he said to me, he said, Ted, why don't you just sell that house using Facebook? And I said, sell a house on Facebook? I've never sold a house on Facebook, and I'm 100 years old. And so he said, why don't we try it? And I said, that's a great idea. Why don't we try it? Long story short, and I won't bore you with all that. Next thing you know, the house is in contract with a police officer that I've never met, never touched him, never talked to him, never done anything. And they did the whole thing on Facebook. And the police officer now has a home that he couldn't have been in because we did what was called a special program, or like a lease option to buy it and so on. He could never afford a house. We got him in a house. He's tickle pink. And this is a property that we bought at an auction for a good price and fixed it up and whatever. The whole point was, he just said, why don't you try Facebook? I said, I never did that. Why don't we try it? But what I find with the people I'm talking to, and I'm just telling that story for their benefit more than mine or yours, is just listen, and all of this stuff is there. So I look at abundance a little bit differently. You look from a very intellectual standpoint. I look at it from all the physical things that are around me. There's so much abundance, I can't even handle it. I work 10 hours a day, and I love doing it. I mean, I have more fun than I've ever had in my life. And there's so much abundance, and it takes people like you to come on a call, put in the extra effort that you're doing today, and tell us about a book and tell us about you can make a change. So you're a blessing to all of us, because people don't, if you say change, oh, what does that mean? What does that mean? It means you're probably going to push the wrong button on the computer and you got to do it again. The world doesn't blow up, and none of that stuff happens, but that's how some of these scarcity thinkers struggle their way through. So talking with you is believe me, you're opening up minds. You're opening them.
Well, I appreciate
if you can get that done, it's major. It's major. It's major. If you can get them to open their mind, you can't get in there until you get it open. I mean, getting it open is the tough part.
And I would offer you another thing to consider, or for your listeners to consider, is that the energy and the passion that you have for the work, Ted, I would suggest comes from where many of us live in the baby boomer generation, is we have purpose in our work. And then the money comes, as we always say. But I think we've been a generation that's been conditioned, particularly if some of your players come from a corporate environment, we've been conditioned to think that at 65, we need to retire or be thinking about it from 60 on. And so I would just challenge your listeners to really think about that time of life and transition, because that's a made up concept, retirement. I don't know that in our history,
what for?
There's never been in the history of mankind, it's a man-made idea, this idea of retirement, and we're living longer. And so what are you retiring to and what for? There's only so many golf games you can play. There's only so many lunches and dinners you can go to. And basically you're trying to recreate a weekend, 7 days a week, all of which costs And so if you're 65 and you're going to live to 90, what difference are you wanting to make the next 20 years in your life? Because what I see with people who retire is they start to diminish very quickly because they're not active, they're not engaged, they don't have a purpose in life. They start to feel as though life just doesn't make any sense. So that's part of, I'm constantly having people come to me who are reinventing themselves and trying to figure out how they're going to do retirement. That's a big question that I would ask your people to consider. What does retirement mean for me? Because it doesn't necessarily mean I have to stop working or earning. It just means I might do it differently.
Exactly. And there's ways to do it differently. And you got to open up your mind to do it.
And that's what you've done.
Time here. And that's what I've got, something altogether different. And seniors and females do much better at it than young people because they have a little bit of patience. Investing takes a little bit of patience, but the seniors have that, and women have that. But most young men, they got to get everything done this afternoon. Give us a few more minutes that we have left, and I really want people to know about this book. I don't know if they'll get off their rusty dusty and order the book, but I know you offered to give it away, but I believe in people should buy things, otherwise they won't read it, and getting people to read a book. But anyway, the name of the book, everyone that's listening, is The Pursuit of Time and Money. And my guest has been Sharon Spano. And Sharon, take a few minutes and talk a little bit more about your book, and then we'll button it up for today. I personally really appreciate you being on the call. You're a blessing. I hope I can invite you back. This is not your level normally. You're like to teach in the corporate environment, but the time that you get dedicated to this today, I hope it'll be really worthwhile to you, because you're helping a lot of people. And these people, they need help, not in the sense that they need money or they need more family. They've got all those things together, but they're struggling and they're unhappy with playing golf every weekend. And that's for sure, or 5 days a week for a lot of them. Tell us a little bit more about the book, and then we'll make another appointment to see each other.
I'd love that. Again, I would encourage people you can get the resources on my website at sharonspano.com, and you can also download a free chapter. And again, you can get it at Amazon or on my website. There's a separate website, theTimeMoneyBook.com, and I've offered, if you do /free for any of your listeners, we'll send one out. But I agree with you. It's always better to purchase because you have some skin in the game, and then really encourage them to do the reflective practices. And then if anyone has questions or they would like to talk with me further, they can always email me at sharonspano.com. That's SP as in Peter, ANO.com. And I'd be happy to we do consults, anything I can do to help them think about what's next in their business or their career.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. I personally want to thank you on behalf of all the other listeners. And if you have any closing words, you could go ahead and tell us that now.
I just want to encourage, first I want to thank you for being on the show, Ted, and for the work that you're doing and for the opportunity that you're offering so many to maybe step into another level of abundance and prosperity, because that's a great service that you're offering. I did not know anything about these tax certificates till I talked with you, and I was talking to my husband about it, and he knew all about them, and he was like, yeah, that's a very viable source of income. Appreciate all of that, but then also to encourage your listeners to not give up. You can always learn new and better ways. There's so much information out there and so many coaches and mentors who are willing to help you reinvent and figure out what this season of life can be about. I would just want to encourage people to take advantage of the internet. Is full of resources, and certainly people like you who are exposing them to what's out there. Those are great opportunities that people want to lean into to experience the highest potential. And I also want to invite them to listen into my podcast, which is theothersideofpotential.com. We've got a lot of really great guests on there who talk about some really meaningful, purposeful ways that they're doing business and philanthropy and contributing to a greater world, because really and truly the world right now needs the wisdom of the baby boomers as we move forward and the next generation takes over. They're looking for some of our learned wisdom along the way. And I think it's our opportunity to lead the path through all the evolutionary periods of change that we're in right now as a nation, as a society.
Thank you. Thank you. I say to my friends, here's a hand clasp across the miles, but with a gorgeous woman, I'm going to take my opportunity while I got it. And here's a hug from across the miles.
Well, thank you so much. Right back. Right back.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. So I'll look forward to talking to you again. I really appreciate your contribution. And if you're finishing up on the podcast, don't shut up right yet, because I want to say the book name again. It's The Pursuit of Time and Money, and now's your chance to get it. So get on the ball and do something. So this is Ted Thomas, and thank all of you for listening. And that was Sharon Spano, Spano. Thank you, Sharon.
Hi, this is Linda. Don't forget, you can listen to more episodes at tedthomaspodcast.com. You can also listen to Imagine Wealth Without Risk on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and Spotify.